to do a little bit of audience participation with people in the group, especially who are using Power BI. Do you like writing DAX? Feel free to write in the chat, or if you feel really strongly, come off mute and we can talk about it for a minute. Do you like writing DAX in Power BI? Okay, so we have mixed. Couple responses. Okay, Russ, not always. Yeah, I think that's me too. 50-50, not sure. Don't demo. Yeah, demoing DAX is tough. Okay. So a variety of responses. All right. Well, for me, I kind of like DAX. And I actually like DAX so much, I bought a t-shirt that says, I heart DAX and wear it to FabCon, which was fun. But I remember not to wear it to the grocery store because people asking if my son or my dog's name is Dax. But even though I like DAX, it took me a long time to learn. And I still come across situations where it might take me some time to get the result that I'm looking for. So DAX can be confusing sometimes, especially for beginners. Maybe if you're working on a model or a report that you've inherited from someone that has little to no documentation. And I'm a super user in the Microsoft Fabric community, which means that I answer questions that people post on forums. And recently came across a post looking for help with DAX. And this was the statement. So this person said they were new to Power BI and trying to do something that I think we would agree is fairly simple or should be fairly simple. And that is to create a sales estimate for this year, which is based on 110% of the previous year's sales. And they said they were new to Power BI, trying to figure this out. If we were doing this in Excel, for example, it would be very easy to reference the previous cells, multiply by 1.1, and you're all set. This was the DAX that this person had come up with. And we can go through this and figure it out and make this work. This does kind of make sense if you get into it and break it down. This is not wrong to do things this way. It's a little bit complicated. So as far as helping a new person, I looked at this and said, no, I don't even want to help you go through this, especially if you're new. What I want to do is show you how to use a visual calculation, which is much clearer, much easier to read, and references data that's on the screen, right? So you can tell exactly where this number is coming from. And you can see the difference. You can add it up. It makes a lot more sense, and it's easier to do. So a little bit about me. I'm Dean Jurecic. I'm a data solutions developer with Power BI and Fabric based outside of the Atlanta area. And, funnily enough, on the Waves picture, I didn't plan to use this, but I had this picture of me whitewater rafting last summer with Scout Troop. So not two motors, but I did have one paddle. And I've been using Power BI on and off almost since its inception, but especially in the past 5 to 6 years, and now working on Fabric projects as well. So here's our agenda for tonight. In the first part of the session, we'll talk mostly about what visual calculations are, their history, and then see some demos on how to create them. Then in the second half, we'll focus more on the application of visual calculations. What do we need to consider when using them? What are some situations that are good candidates for using Visual Calcs? And of course, go over limitations as well. So the origin of visual calculations, like we discussed, is that DAX is hard or can be hard, especially with new people or people coming into Power BI from other platforms like Excel. The reasons for that, you have to understand filter and row context. You have to understand data modeling and relationships. It's a different mindset. And Power BI is designed to be used by a mix of business users and IT professionals. So thinking about a person who doesn't necessarily want to learn a new language or a new, expression language in order to do their job. They just want to get the end result. And so with this in mind as some factors that can make DAX difficult, enter visual calculations. So visual calculations make it easier to create calculations that were previously hard to create, leading to simpler DAX, easier maintenance, and better performance, according to Microsoft Learn. So let's see if that's true. here's a timeline of the development of visual calculations, and started way back in December 2022. And so this has been planned for a long time. And back at that point, this was the announcement, or the text that went along with the announcement in 2022. Functions are just a stepping stone, a building block towards our goal of making DAX easier. If after reading this section you don't feel like these functions are for you, rest assured we are aware and working on making DAX easier for you as well. So way back in 2022, the sort of foundation of visual calculations was released, with them being released in preview in February 2024. Now, since then, one thing that stands out to me is that there have been at least 7 updates. This is based on the Power BI and Fabric blog. So since their release in preview, and at least 7 updates. To me, that means that Microsoft is working on this feature and has resources dedicated to it. I don't have any specific inside information, but I think it's fair to say that we can be on the lookout for more updates in the future. And I'll walk very briefly through these updates. Essentially, what they're doing is trying to make a visual calculation have greater parity to a traditional measure. So being able to work in the service, being able to set data types, export, add conditional formatting, reference column highlights and parameter pickers. I'll show those, just make it easier to see what's included in the formula, and then the ability to set a sort order. So what are visual calculations? They're another way of adding data to a Power BI visual. They exist only on a single visual. They only reference what is on the visual, not the entire data model. In fact, they cannot access the data model at all. They can only access what's on the page. And they're designed to be easier to use and require less specialized DAX knowledge than measures. So with that in mind, let's do a brief demo here of some visual calculations and comparing them to traditional measures. So this is a sample data set. I'll show you the model here. Very basic star schema with a sales fact table. And for example, these are just easy, but want to show the differences with sum of profit versus prior year, our fiscal year, and then running sum. And I've went ahead and created these measures ahead of time. So sum of profit, that's pretty easy, right? Sales minus cost. Profit versus prior fiscal year. So here's one way to do it. There are now multiple ways to do this, especially with the enhanced time intelligence. But one way to do it is to get the selected year, do a calculate on the sum of profit, use all to escape the date filter, and then set the date to fiscal year -1 to get the previous year, and then return the sum minus the prior year. So this is kind of easy to do, but it may be difficult for a beginner. And then the other measure we have here is the running sum. Again, getting the selected year, doing a calculate, and getting the sum where the date is less than or equal to the selected year. So in order to do this, we have to understand concepts like selected value, using calculate, and using all to escape filters. And now let's take a look at how to do this using visual calculations. So first, sum of profit. But in order to get sum of profit, I don't have a measure here. Actually do, but we're going to do add sum of sales and add sum of cost. And then to add a new visual calculation, there are a couple ways to get there. You can go to modeling, new visual calculation. We can right click here and say new visual calculation, or we can click the dots here and say new visual calculation. I'll get to the same place. And there are a couple of pre-built tasks, but I'm going to go custom for now. And the interface is very similar to what you'd get when, for example, you did show as table. Right? It's the exact same thing, except this bottom part is more interactive. So let's do here, new visual calculation, custom. Have sales on here. Let's see. And this editor is very similar to the standard DAX editor. And the IntelliSense is pretty good here too. Sales, costs, and that's it. That's the highlighting that we saw earlier. So, okay, this is here. Okay, so that looks good, right? But we don't want to see sales and costs. We just want to see profit. So how we can achieve that is to go back here. And so I'm going to keep them on the visual, but hide them. So they're still there and they still can be referenced, but they're hidden so they don't appear. The other thing that I'll do here is for formatting, under General, and then Data Format. So we can do this as currency. Okay, perfect. So we have the same formatting options. And then I'll go ahead and add some of profit versus prior year as well, and add a couple more. Here we can say versus previous. So that's a built-in. We just say profit, previous, profit. Okay, that's there. And I'll show this too. If you do make a mistake, it will let you know right away. Add something crazy here. Boom. Okay. But don't do that. And then the other one that we had was the running sum. That's literally just running sum of profit. Okay, so here we have the same results, with understanding very little DAX and not having to understand all to calculate anything like that. We're just literally using what's on the vision itself. I'll go through and give a couple more examples here. For example, moving average, right? Here's the traditional way to do it. And I've added a little bit more here to handle the date, so it doesn't necessarily have to be this complicated. But you might end up with something like this, where I'm getting a selected month, getting the selected month -3, then getting the first of the month, and doing a calculate dates between, and then dividing by 3 to get the average. So average sales per month for moving average. Let's do this with a visual calculation. Select moving average. So what field do I want? Sales and window size, right? So that's how far back we want to go. So 3 months. And it's there. Now, there is one thing important here to look at, and it has to do with the visual calculations being only able to access what's on the page. So because this can go back, the traditional way can go back and look at what's in the model, we can go past into the previous fiscal year. The visual calculations can't do that, right? So the first month, the 3-month moving average is the same as the first month value. The second month is an average of the first 2 months. And then it's only when we get to the third month that the moving average is the same as the traditional way of doing things. So that's something to be aware of. That is by design. I've talked to some of the people at Microsoft about this, and they say, yes, we know it's by design. It's not really considered a bug or an error, but definitely something to be aware of. And you can see this even a little bit more pronounced when looking at a 6-month moving average, for example. So this is the same data, but you can see between sort of the orange and dark blue that doesn't catch up until the 6th month. So something to be aware of there.
Dean, are you able to take questions during the presentation?
Yeah, go ahead. I think that's fine.
Toby has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. I'm not really monitoring the chat.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
so
go
Toby,
ahead. Yeah.
Oh, Toby can't see the screen, so it's a technical issue. I'm
Okay.
unable to see it. I don't. It might be you just disconnect and reconnect, Toby, because it seems to be coming through fine. And I had raised my hand briefly, but you covered exactly what I was going to ask, which was how does it handle like the first 2 years in the three? But you just answered it. Thank you. And Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, hello. What kind of visuals does Visual Calculations not work on? It seems to me, I mean, I've just briefly caught about how you create a new visual calculation from, say, a clustered bar chart, but are there any restrictions for which kind of visuals you can use? And could you give an example?
There are, I don't have the exact list. It does work on most things. So I'd have to check on Microsoft Learn. I will get you that information. I know it does work for most things, but there are a few that it doesn't. And some of them were like some of the visuals that have now been deprecated. I know there was some where it didn't work, but I'll find out.
Okay.
It
No,
does
no
work
rush.
with most things, though. Yeah, no, good question.
Can you show, just briefly show how you brought up the menu again? Did you right click on the visualizations panel,
Oh
or
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. So there's a couple different ways to do it here under modeling, new visual calculation, and then custom.
yeah, I'm not sure I have that option on my version of Power BI, but I'll
So
double
this is a
check.
preview feature. I think it is now enabled by
Did you say a premium
default
feature?
preview.
Preview feature, okay.
But on the, I don't know what version it became enabled by default on, but you might need to enable it. So that would be, see if we can find out where this is. You see what I'm doing here? We go into options and then preview features. And so it's visual calculations here.
Roger, thank you.
So
Over.
you may have to enable that if it's not already enabled. And then once you do have it, like I said, there are 3 different ways to create it. To edit an existing, you just go over here and go to edit calculation. Okay, so let's take a look at the Pareto chart. This is everybody's favorite. And this can be done the traditional way. There's some complexity to it. And so let's look at how that can be done the traditional way, Pareto sales by region. So this is one where I had to look up how to do it because I don't do this all the time. What we're doing here is getting the total sales of all the regions, getting the sales for the current region, creating a table with the selected regions and their associated sales, and then getting the sum of all the regions that have a greater sales value from the current region plus the current. And then dividing that to get the percentage. So this is kind of complicated, especially for a new person. I mean, you could break it down logically and it makes sense, but it's not immediately apparent how to do this, for example. Now let's take a look at the Visual Calcs way to do it. And there are a couple different things here. So first, we need to create the percent of grand total. And that's going to divide sum of sales. And you see this collapse all here. I'll explain that. Sum of sales by rows. So there are certain DAX functions, and collapse all is one of them, that exist only for the purpose of visual calculations. And Microsoft Learn has some pretty good resources on that. I'll show that here. So for example, collapse all. But when you look this up, you can see that visual calculation here is checked while the other applies to are X out. So that means this only applies to visual calculation. And what this does is collapse everything to the highest level in the hierarchy. So there's collapse to go one level up. There's collapse all to go all the way up. And then the same thing, there's expand and expand all to go one level and all the way to the lowest level down. And so you see here, yeah, this function can be used only in visual calculations. Is at level is another one. So this is similar to like is in scope or has one value, maybe when you're trying to get a total row versus an individual record, but it can only be used with visual calculations. You can use is in scope, but it's not recommended because it doesn't always work. There are some weird things with it. So this is recommended as a replacement. And then we'll look at a traditional function like related. So of course it applies to calculated columns, tables, and measures, but not visual calculations because there's no relationship. There's no model to even relate. So that doesn't apply at all. So Microsoft Learn is a good resource for what types of DAX will work with Visual Calcs and what won't work. So we got the percent of grand total, and then running sum. So this is just getting the percent of grand total and ordering by sum of sales descending. So to me, this is a lot easier than doing this Pareto sales by region. I'll show this as a comparison. The other thing to consider is that this is just by region. So if you want Pareto sales by other metrics, you have to create multiple, or perhaps look at using UDF to do that. But with Visual Calcs, you just have to use what's on the visual. So you don't have to create a lot of different versions of the same thing. So cards, visual calculations work with that too. I just thought that was kind of interesting because you can do stuff like this where you're only going to see one field value on the card, but you can add different values and then hide them. So it even does work with the card and the new card. Versus previous row. So this is something that's, again, very easy to do in Excel, and I'll show this. So this is according to the region, and we have region in ascending order. How do we do this? And we get there's a region alpha sort I've added, get the sum of sales, filtering all regions where the region is one less than the selected region. And then in order to filter out a total that really doesn't make sense to show something in the total for this, just saying if it has one value, show the sum of sales, minus previous, if not, show blank. So let's take a look at doing that with visual calculations. Just going to do custom here. Okay, so versus previous. So this looks good. Any issues that you can spot with this? Anybody want to comment in the chat? Okay, well, I can see a couple issues. One is this first row here, probably over here too. It doesn't really make sense because there is no previous region. So Australia. And the total doesn't make sense, right? So there's really no reason to have a total. So there are ways you can get around that too. I'll show that here. So what this is doing, you could declare variables similar to traditional DAX, saying just get the first region. And if region is the first region, return blank. If not, return sales. Okay, so now I have a blank first region and a blank total as well. And I think that's probably what we want to see here.
I'm sorry, I missed something. Why did it blank the total?
Let me take a look here. You know, that's interesting because
I mean, the context, what is the context? There is a different filter context for the total, right?
yeah, because there is that level function I was looking at before, and I was using that previously. But I'll look into that and I can figure out why. Because I see what you're saying, right? It's just looking at first region, but it's also blank out the total.
But it may be in the filter
Yeah.
context of the total, it is true. Because the
Yeah.
region in what is the first region in that filter context? I don't know. But
Yeah.
maybe
No, that's a good question. I'll do some follow-up on that, but yeah, thank you for asking that.
So, oh, there's
How
a
does
question. Why has a question? Yeah, do you see that?
Yes. Is it magic? So I think it would be the same. I don't necessarily know if I have an example for that. This data set, I think, region. Let's see if I can add something like country.
And just to repeat the question is, how does the calculation work with a hierarchy such as continent greater than country?
Yeah, so this data set doesn't really have, I don't think, a good example for that. But let me follow up on that and I will try to get you some more information on it. Let me show one more example here, and this is something that was just released in preview at FabCon last month, and this is custom totals. And it doesn't say this in the title when they released it, but it does use visual calculations. So one thing you can do here is looking at the totals here. And this has kind of been around for a while. I don't want to get into any controversy, but if we look here, this is unique salespeople by region. But if we add this number up, it does not equal 17. All right, if we go through, what is this, 6, 10, 12, 17, 23, 27, like 34, right? So 34 people. The reason for this is because the salespeople are in multiple regions, right? So they're counted once each, for example, France, Germany, United Kingdom, but then at the total, they're counted only one time to get 17 total. So, I mean, to me, this is correct and it's fine. If you do want to see the numbers add up to the sum of these numbers, you can do that in the traditional way. And I have a measure here called salespeople 2, where you're getting the values of each region and then calculating the distinct count of the salesperson for that region. Let me add that here. So here you're getting 34 if you want to see that. Using the new method, you just right click and do customize total calculation preview. And I'm going to click sum here. So this sums up at the totals exactly what's on the screen. And I'll show you how that works though. So it actually changes the name of the initial column, the original column, to salespeople underscore base, creates a new visual calc called salespeople, where it expands all and gets the sum this way. So it replaces it with a visual calculation. And one thing I've heard about this, I haven't experimented with it too much, but I've heard that there are maybe some performance issues with it versus the traditional DAX method.
So can I?
So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Dean, yeah, this is Amin. I'm sorry. So I saw when you went on that was kind of exciting. I didn't realize that was there. The options were sum and count. Is that right? So, and min and max, I think. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Like funny, average is not there. You can sum and divide by count. So you could write a visual calc. Do you think that did a sum and a count and computed an average, or do you think the total wouldn't let you compose them in that way?
I don't know about that. You know, I have heard that same criticism is why don't they have average, right, as an option? So that might be coming. This is just the preview and the initial release. I would think that's something that people are interested in, but
Okay.
Yeah,
thank-
also it
thank
may
you.
not be possible because underlying it might not be possible. I don't know. A good question. All right. So with that said, this is the end of the demo. And any further questions before we leave the demo and go on with the presentation?
I got another
Okay.
question.
Okay.
So there was this, and somebody wrote in the chat that it's faster. Was it Sheila? Yeah, that the visuals render faster. And that was one of the promises of it. Have you had an opportunity to use this? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but like with a client that had big data where you could maybe observe the difference?
So I've heard that same thing as well, that it's faster, especially when using direct query. I haven't personally observed that, but it makes sense, right? Because it does not have to go back to the model to do additional calculations. It's just using what's existing and what's on the screen. So yes, I believe that's true. I haven't done really testing on the performance, but especially with direct query, it's supposed to be much faster.
Okay, and Janar has a question about exporting and downloading data. Is it just like a regular visual? You
Yep,
export?
just like a regular visual. Yep, you export the
Okay,
data
Janar,
too.
hopefully that answers your question.
And
If
then
not-
right,
Sorry.
yeah, but that was not when this first came out. That was not available, but now it is. It's been for over a year or more. All right, cool. So let's go back here. So far we've seen that visual calculations are easy to create, produce results similar to using traditional measures. So why don't we just use visual calculations all the time instead of measures? Anybody want to do that? Amin, you up for that?
Now you put me on the spot. Listen, I'm psyched about those totals. That was the one thing I was
Okay.
I was disappointed. I wanted to do something. There were no totals. So I'm going to give a 50-50 to your question. Sam
Okay.
has a question.
Fair enough.
So Sam, did you not catch that it's a preview feature? So how to turn it on, you have to make sure you go to options and settings. Dean had brought that on the screen where he went to his options and settings and he scrolled down until he found, right? I think Dean, you had to scroll down a little bit to get to it,
Yeah.
but it was preview feature.
And message me afterwards and I can give you some more information on that. So
Yeah,
Fernando
I
says
did-
no. Oh, go ahead.
I did scroll down, but I could not find. I think I've turned it on, but it's just not showing. But that's fine. I can message you after.
Okay, perfect. Right. Thank you, Jack. Okay, so there are some considerations and limitations that we need to consider. This is a cool tool. And this table from Microsoft Learn does a good comparison really on all the calculation options that are available in Power BI. Over on the right, we're comparing measures and visual calculations. And what stood out to me here was where each of them are stored. Measure, of course, is stored in the model. Visual calculation has no relationship to the model and stored only on the visual. So what does this mean? And here are some other considerations, right? They're not stored in the data model. You can't copy and paste them easily. You can't filter on Visual Calcs. They are limited to certain types of visuals, but I think most are supported, and I'll find out which ones aren't. They're not available for publish to web and still in preview. Good news is, if you like visual calculations, that they are scheduled for GA in Q2 2026. So next couple months, looks like they're going to be GA. But why is it a big deal that visual calculations are not stored in the model? And when I first heard that, I was actually in this group sometime last year, I thought, oh, well, I can't really use them if they're not stored in the model. I don't know. The reason is this, and you guys have probably seen something like this before. If you hired me to be a consultant for your Power BI project, this is what I would try to build, right? Getting raw data, moving it through a medallion architecture into a gold layer, and we're going to do reporting off of the gold layer, create a shared semantic model, maybe one or more. The reason for this is because this is a single source of truth for our data, and we add measures to the shared model. We know that each report creator using that model, when they use measure one, they're going to get the same result using the measure in the same context every single time. With visual calculations, you can potentially create different calculations on a different report. So with that in mind, can we still use them? What are some ways that you might want to use them? And this is what I had to think about really, because at first I thought, no, we can't use them. And then when I started thinking about it more, I thought, okay, I think there are some ways, and I'll show you guys what I think and to agree or disagree. So here's sort of a traditional case for report development, where we have a consumer, report creator, and maybe a data engineer. And a lot of times the consumer and creator might be part of a business unit, like HR, sales, marketing, whatever. And then over here, we have the data engineer as part of a centralized IT unit. So maybe they're a consultant. They're not assigned to the business unit, right? They're dealing with multiple business units and multiple issues. So in the sort of traditional model that works well, report consumer requests a new feature, report creator says, fine, I'm going to write whatever measures are necessary, add the visual, gets the result back to the consumer, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4th step, consumer has the result. And then later on, it's and they can decide to add it to the shared semantic model if they want to, right? And we can talk about that a little bit later as well. So what happens if the analyst doesn't know DAX in sort of a traditional way? And I don't have to imagine this too much, because I think back to when I started using Power BI, and I was in this position, so at least some of the time. Report consumer requests a new feature, creator tries to figure it out. Maybe they can use Copilot, use AI to look it up. I think that's fine. The one thing I'll say about that is if you don't understand DAX at all and you have Copilot or AI create your DAX, I think it's hard to verify that it's correct or that it will produce the correct results, depending on the situation. So I also go on the forums or ask for help, whatever you need to do. In this case, go to the data engineer. They're creating the model, they're creating the measure to add to the model. Then finally gets back and reviews the result. So we have an extra step in here. One of the problems here is, between the creator and the data engineer, what does this step look like? The data engineer has multiple things they're working on. Depending on the size of the organization, the report creator has to create a ticket. They have to wait till the data engineer has free time, and probably not a high priority item. Then, in addition to that, what happens when the result is not approved by the consumer? This has happened to me actually recently as someone maybe more in the data engineer space, where I get a ticket to do something. I do the ticket as it's written, say complete, boom. Oh, they didn't sign off on it because really we wanted you to do something else. So the communication, because the data engineer is not really familiar with this business unit. They don't necessarily know the context. So they might not know to ask specific questions or to say, hey, did you really mean this? Or this doesn't make sense. They don't know because they're not part of that unit. So they're just going to do it as written. If it's not written well, there's a risk of that not working. So then in this case, once this happens, we got to start the whole process all over again, which is not good. So let's say the analyst doesn't know DAX, same situation, except now we're using visual calculations. Report consumer requests it. Creator does it with visual calculation, boom. 3rd step, they're reviewing the result. They'll get to it very quickly. They can approve it, and then they can also decide to go back and add to the shared semantic model later. Now, one of the things you might want to consider is not adding things to the semantic model, especially if they're one-offs, like the Pareto we looked at before. If that's going to be used on a single visual in 1 or 2 reports, depending on the size of the model, how many measures are there, that might not be something that you want to add. So it's just something to consider that you don't necessarily have to add everything to the model, to a shared semantic model. And I think this works well with the principles of Agile. According to the Agile Manifesto, the highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. That's the #1 principle. I think this works well with that. So here's something else that I found this works well with, which is that it enables the report creator to be proactive. In the previous 3 examples, the report creator was reactive, right, responding to requests. And especially if they had to get a data engineer, someone else involved, they're using up resources to fulfill the requests that they're getting. In this case, if they're using visual calculations, they're not using up a lot of resources and a lot of time trying to figure out measures. They could be more proactive in creating visuals that maybe aren't requested, but maybe are suggested, or that they can suggest to their end users. To me, they can add more value in this way because they're not spending their time trying to figure out specific DAX syntax. They're spending their time understanding the business needs and trying to come up with reports and visuals that meet those business needs. So another place where I think this would come in handy is with a data model built for future use. And I've done this as a consultant where we come in and sort of do discovery and ask the business, okay, what measures do you want? This is your chance. I'm going to be here for 3 months, or our company's going to be here for a couple months, a couple weeks. Give me everything you want, and we're going to add it. So the business unit requests a lot because this is their chance to get something, added to the model. They've been waiting maybe for a long time. The consultant's going to do it. Let's throw everything in there, whether we need it or not, or maybe we need it, maybe we don't, but it doesn't hurt to get it added. And what ends up happening is, especially if it's outsourced or even not, right? The consultant or the data engineer is spending a lot of time writing measures. And in this particular case that I had a request, it was, 300 measures, something like that I created. When I went back and looked over like a couple months later with Measure Killer, there were over 100 unused measures in the model, just because it was something that the business thought they might need in the future. So they requested it, which is fine. I don't blame them, but they ended up not using it. And so with visual calculations, I feel like there's a process that you can use where you don't feel that fear of missing out if you don't get something added right away. And going back to the Pareto example, if you wanted Pareto by different categories, you could do this, or you could do some kind of UDF. And then here's an example of a less complicated data environment where Power BI is used to create semantic models without maybe a data warehouse or a data lake. In this example, there are one or a small number of report creators. There may not be any data engineers. So with a smaller organization and smaller number of reports, there's less chance of conflict between report creators creating multiple measures, and probably more opportunities for a one-off visual that can be created with calculations. So the potential issue here, and something to watch out for, is that the environment can grow, right, and move more towards the enterprise model. And building a technical debt is something to watch out for here. If it's not done in an optimized way to start out with, you're going to maybe have to go back and dig yourself out of a hole later on. So Microsoft does a good job explaining sort of these Power BI usage scenarios, going from personal BI, where you're kind of doing your own looking at the data. There are a lot of tools in Fabric that you can do, including the visual query there instead of using Power BI. And then team collaboration, moving up to departmental and enterprise BI. So especially when you're getting into departmental and enterprise, it becomes a lot more important to have that single source of truth. So there are governance available for these. They exist in the JSON file. And so I'll show a resource in a minute, which is a book that talks about how to get this value. You can look for this native visual calculation to see what's happening and see what the example is. And then there are actually some third-party software tools that allow you to monitor the use of visual calculations in your organization. So Data Visioneer has one. I haven't used this myself, but like if I don't feel like writing a notebook that goes through the PBIP files and looks at JSON and tries to figure that out, there are third-party tools that are becoming available. So closing thoughts from me, the visual calculations are another tool in the tool belt. It doesn't hurt you to learn about them. You might find situations that could come in useful, especially if you're teaching new people how to use Power BI and how to use DAX. I think it's part of our jobs as data professionals to kind of keep up with the new stuff that's coming out and just understanding the capabilities of Fabric and Power BI. And this is one of those capabilities, whether we end up using it or not. Identify good use cases, like we talked about, and be aware of the limitations. I think still learn DAX, depending on how much you're going to be in the data and reporting space. I think it's still a valuable skill and something to learn. And then finally, watch for future updates. And I'll leave you with a couple of resources. So Microsoft Learn, of course, we looked at. There is a book that came out last year, and I've read probably most of it. Microsoft Power BI Visual Calculations, Simplifying DAX. So this is a link to Amazon. And I can send that to you later on if you'd like. Something else I saw, and actually just today, a couple of articles dropped from SQL BI about visual calculations, including how to use them with UDFs. A lot of good stuff there. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Dean, there is a question in the chat.
Okay.
And I don't know, KP, if you were going to go there to the chat.
Right.
Okay. So I don't know. I guess I'll read it. Or did you want to turn off recording, Kevin?
No, let's go ahead and leave it on for a few questions, and then we'll offer up without recording.
Okay, so I don't know, Dean, if you can see the chat. It's a question about creating a visual calc for a particular situation, a control chart. Want to count the number of times one measure exceeds the average. I do want to recall earlier in the talk, Dean asked all the people who did they like writing DAX or not. And I think all the folks who said they like writing DAX need to put their money where their mouth is and go solve this problem. No, so would you say, is that a visual calc or a DAX? What do you say when you read that description of the requirement?
I'm reading it right now. So I think this could be a good use case for visual calculations. How about this? This is by LinkedIn, this QR code here. If you connect with me and send that to me, I think we could come up with something that'll work using visual calculations. And then I see another one. Would you put visual calcs in the same level of using Deneb? I haven't used Deneb a lot. To me, I think it's pretty easy. It can get it can get complicated, right? So just because it can be easy doesn't mean that it doesn't have the ability. Like if you look at some of the SQL BI stuff, they're using visual calcs in a sort of a more complicated way. So I don't know if I have a great answer to that versus Deneb, but overall it is pretty easy. But you can also add layers of complexity to it.
In Dean, a question here from myself, thinking about governance overall, not just at the not just at the report layer, but just overall in general. Like, how would you in an organization certify any report that may have visual calcs in there, and or encourage the use of visual calcs across the organization when, like you said, you can always build up more tech debt, and things change over time and so on.
So one thing that could be interesting, I didn't really talk about it, was using this more for testing purposes, right? So to get the end result and get that sort of approved, and then moving that to a, like, especially if the data engineer has to be involved, right? I don't want to involve them in something and then have that thrown away because it changes or it ends up not being used. So that could be a case where you use the visual calc, that gets approved, and then periodically, maybe using one of those tools, or maybe voluntarily, the business unit would say, hey, here's the 3 visual calcs we added. We do want to use these going forward. Can you add these to the model? Something like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying, embed this as part of your process of, hey, every so often, like when we do a retrospect or something like that, that we go back and say, these are the visual calcs that we've added for the specific use cases. Now we need to embed them into the model, and or maybe get rid of them.
Yeah.
If they've outlived themselves.
I like that idea, and I think that's would be a good practice. Yes.
All right. Any other questions for the recording? Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording for anybody who may want to ask questions outside of the recording. All right, I don't see any on here, so let me go ahead and stop the recording now, and then I'm going to throw the session feedback QR code for you guys.